I think everything is moving to digital wallets.
Absolutely. The industry is moving so fast and it's moving incrementally.
How Visa and MasterCard works, nobody knows, and yet they use them.
It's making the user life easier. At the end of the day, that's what's needed.
I like to say that fraudsters are the most knowledgeable and smart people on earth.
So it's spotting fraud indicators which might mitigate fraud in the future.
It's crazy.
Hello, dear audience, and welcome to Series 3 of What the Fraud, a podcast by Sumsub where digital fraudsters meet their match. I'm Thomas Traniak, currently Head of Partnerships at Sumsub, the global verification platform helping to verify users, businesses, and of course, transactions as well. Real-time payments, of course, have become the bedrock of modern life. Whether you're splitting a dinner bill with your friends or paying a high-value corporate payout, we're now used to sending money instantly and irreversibly as well. But with this convenience, of course, comes risk. I mean, this instant transaction gives banks only milliseconds to flag suspicious activity. Today, we're going to explore the upside of this speed and convenience, as well as the downsides, a new tangle of fraud risks, liability questions, and risk control challenges. In this episode, we sit down with a real expert in the field. Arthur Bedel is a fintech advisor and the co-founder of Connecting the Dots in Payments, a global platform curating the latest content in the world of payments. I would love to rewind a little bit from my intro. What drew you first into payments and the sphere of payments infrastructure? Was there something about the space that you found enticing as well?
I think everybody kind of lands in the space.
Yeah.
You don't really choose it. But what was very fascinating about the space was the impact, the reach, right? We think about payments and everything linking to payments, right? Identity, fraud, and everything else. It impacts everyone. Everyone needs to get paid, or everyone needs to pay, right? And like that friction that you have is a global kind of initiative that's just happening everywhere, all at once, all the time. And so, like, whenever I started learning more about it, about how simple it looks on the outside, how complex it is on the inside, and everything that's actually happening behind. This is fascinating. Okay, so like start learning, and yeah, I've been here, and hopefully we'll be here for a few more years.
Oh, absolutely. I think I've got the same sort of idea as well. I mean, it affects everyone. Everyone's using payments. Everyone should be interested in stopping fraud in payments as well. I mean, last year as well, you set up Connecting the Dots in Payments, right? What gaps in, let's say, the market or sharing of information did you find to make you set up Connecting the Dots in Payments?
Yeah, so I guess I'll give you a little bit of context. Connecting the Dots in Payments, right? Originally, there was another company kind of created by Marcel van Hoest, who's my partner. He's been doing that. Like, he exited 2 companies in the payment space, major investor and advisor for major companies, and kind of brilliant idea at the time, like 6.5 years ago, to just decide to start posting the news on LinkedIn about fintech, but everything related to fintech. But payments was kind of his baby. And fast forward, right? Like when I joined the payments industry a couple of years ago, I didn't know anything, candidly. And as I said, it was extremely complex. So it was fascinating to kind of learn things. And I felt like I wasn't exactly getting the information as straightforward as I wanted to when I asked people around. And so I said, well, just like everyone else, right? Especially coming out of school, why don't I just go into the research? And when I did that, I kind of started just publishing. But my content was very different from Marcel. Marcel had really understood like publishing news and everything that was around this, centralizing news and doing this for me was more educational. As I was learning, why not just publish it?
So it was learning for yourself, and then you got to the point where you were trying to explain what you were learning to everyone else. I've seen your posts. I mean, you make everything super, super easily digestible, right?
Thank you.
Real-time payments have now become commonplace, Arthur. Transactions that took days are now taking seconds. I mean, this is a huge transition. And according to ACI Worldwide, which you're familiar with, they released a report where they shared over 266 billion real-time transactions are globally happening in 2023, with projections of reaching 575 billion by 2028. You're in a unique position, Arthur, with a vantage point across both merchant networks as well on the broader payments ecosystem. Where do you see the momentum building in real-time payments, and where do you think it's heading next?
I think there's a use case for everybody every party within the space. So, you look at consumers, you look at merchants, you look at providers. It's just the way that things should be. There are, of course, issues, and I'm sure we'll touch on them at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely see that trend kind of increasing. And I think I did actually post about the ACI report. So that's funny that you actually could got some info.
You might have taken that from there.
Yeah.
So with connecting the dots and payments as well, Arthur, you're getting, as I mentioned before, bird's eye view on the payments landscape across the board. We're talking about geographically, we're talking about different sectors, and you've also spent a lot of your time traveling the world and explaining many facets in real time to lots of experts. So we know there are significant regional differences, right, in the adoption of real-time payments, particularly when you talk about South America. On the other side of the coin, we have North America, where the adoption is quite a bit slower, you would say, right? What factors are now shaping all the different regional rollouts and the varied timeframes that we're looking at, would you say?
So in the US, you have Fed now. That's moving. RTPs have been around, but I think, identity, fraud, risk appetite are things that people are looking at. When you look at also the way that people have been paying, I think when you look at payment trends, they tend to, like countries that have been, or regions that have been a little bit behind, they tend to skip one. So you look at APAC, right? They totally skipped just cards and went into digital wallets, right? You look at LATAM, they kind of skipped, cards and moved into RTP. And it's like the US has had cards. The networks are from there. Taking a step back once again, the networks are, without them, essential first. Without them, there's no payments today. What they've constructed is a layer of trust, is a layer of tokenization, for example, things like this that today is not necessarily yet in there for the US. I don't think that the services around RTPs are the same. I think you make a transaction. How do you charge it back, for example? Like things like this. And so when you're a consumer and you have that choice linking to one payment method like cards or PayPal, for example.
Right.
You don't have that, or the appetite is very different in Latin America. You might want the funds to be there instantly, because if it takes 3 to 5 days, maybe you'll just never receive the funds. In the US, you're almost certain guaranteed that you will.
Definitely. Arthur, fraud is already a growing concern for customers on a global basis, but more specifically, research by data analysts FICO found that 33% of Americans said that they experienced a scam last year, 2024. That's up from 20% in 2023. Now, the speed of real-time transactions opens up even more avenues for frauds on the American scope, but also on a global frontier as well. Are you seeing particular vulnerabilities, Arthur, emerging in authentication methods, merchant systems, or even in, let's say, user behaviors?
Let's look at the type of frauds that are evolving, right? You look at synthetic identity fraud, which is something I think that a lot of companies are talking about right now. It's very hard to combat. And what I mean by this is it's a type of fraud where an individual will basically go and get, a real social security number, but then will have fake everything else, every other document. Or today with AI, you can fabricate a social security number and potentially have other pieces of the information correct. And so it's very hard when you only look at one piece of information, or when, you want frictionless payments with RTP, to do all of those checks and security checks right around every single document. So unless you have a network, right, of companies sharing that data, so you've seen something fraudulent and you provide it, or you look at behavioral analysis like in real time, it's very hard to kind of fight that type of fraud, and AI is not necessarily going to help there, because give you an example. Whenever you're expensing something, and please don't do this, but whenever you're expensing something, you can literally go to an AI, say where you ate, say create a receipt, put the number that you want, the number of people that you want.
It's crazy, yeah.
It's crazy. Oh. Right, it's like things like this are happening. How do you combat them? It's tough. There is first-party fraud as well, which I like to call like buyer's remorse, almost. Like that's another one. How do you reverse a transaction with RTP? You can, so the fees are high. I like to say that fraudsters are the most knowledgeable and smart people on earth, because no matter how much like security and everything else you put in place, they'll always find a way. So actually, I almost want to return the question, right? Like I see a lot of fraud, as I mentioned, synthetic identity fraud, first-party fraud, even like pushing funds, like APP. When you push funds out, it's very hard to recoup them afterwards. And usually people like buyers do it by themselves. They just say, you know what, like, yeah, that sounds like a real company that I'm sending funds to for a service that doesn't actually exist. So those things, right, are things that we see. You're in a much better position actually to tell me a bit more about like, how do you guys combat that type of fraud?
Well, from our perspective, you touched on a few good points here. With RPT on a global scale, you have people which are used to the instant gratification. We're no longer talking, as I mentioned, about days for these transactions to go through, but seconds. And of course, reversing things after they've happened within a millisecond, etc., is almost nigh impossible. So it's spotting fraud indicators which might mitigate fraud in the future, spotting indicators which put a person on a risk matrix based on their behaviors within a certain period, right? Certain behaviors, device intelligence, all of these different attributes which you can tie to a person. Just over 70% of fraud happens after the fact of the KYC, right? So linking the journey is super important for businesses, not only to protect the bottom line, but also protect the community as well of people. There's a lot of trust involved here. And I think the actual idea is people need to be taught about fraud in the way that it's not an everyday like naughty thing, right? You're not a scammer or a fraudster. You're a criminal at the end of the day if you're doing stuff like this.
Well, I think you guys, with this, what the fraud, right, the podcast, I think you guys are doing this, which is awesome. And so, like, for me specifically, just to bounce back on what you're saying, like, I've read a lot of what can we do prior to the transaction. So analysis of behaviors, right, fingerprinting devices, things like this, using tokenization to ultimately... Tokenization will not necessarily do anything against synthetic identity fraud, but it might help actually make sure that the information, the credentials, cannot be reused. There are things like this that you can put in place prior to a transaction kind of happening, but it's post-transaction with RTP that becomes extremely complicated. And as you just said, for me, it's probably even going to get worse. Why? Because you look at, some of the new trends out there. And you look things wanting to be seamless. We're talking about mostly right now making purchases, on a device, like you're on your phone or something like this, like e-commerce. But what about, agentic AI, right? Agentic purchasing. What's going to happen there, right? Around tokenization, things like this. To me, one of the biggest things that needs to happen is tokenization has been applicable mainly on cards. Yeah, it's fine. I talked with a good friend of mine and one of the, I think, most knowledgeable person I know in the French market around payments this morning. I was in MRC in Barcelona, funny enough. So, and I was telling him what I find kind of crazy is the fact that you lose a card or you get your card stolen or the credential stolen, you block it and there you go, you get a new one. Great. What happens if somebody steals your bank account information? Right. Like, it's a lot more complicated to actually go around this. And I think, when you talk about RTP, sometimes it is ultimately, bank account information that can be pushed out there as in terms of the credentials. And so like that to me is something that's scary. Right. And like you need proactively to put things in place, like for the person making the purchase. So like knowing what their profile is like, as you said, collecting information. I think there needs to be a network in between companies like you guys and others to combat that kind of synthetic identity fraud. But then the second thing is then passively, when the transaction is happening, looking at behavior in real time. Right? Like, for example, I know some companies are looking right now at like, how do people type their card information if they do? Or how do people ultimately like look at the phone, the biometrics aspect, like how fast do they do it? Those are things that people are analyzing to make sure the transaction actually is not fraudulent. So like those are things that I think can be put in place. But as I said, it's kind of what happens after.
Definitely. And I mean, the payments sphere is just moving so fast, right? So everyone else is playing catch up.
Yeah.
I mean, are we sacrificing security at this pace? I mean, at the end of the day, how should the industry itself balance this speed of evolving payments and infrastructure with the security that's needed to protect everyone who's involved?
I kind of love this question because, you look at merchants and what do they try and do? They try to create the best experience for consumers. But then, payments and fraud is like two levers. And so you have, if payment acceptance goes up, if it goes too high, then you're going to have fraud. And so like, it's not good, right? Because like, for example, you work with the networks, stopping out of RTP for a second, you work with the networks, Visa, MasterCard. Once you reach a certain fraud level, you get fined, right? So it's like, you have to be careful with this. So that's number one. It's levers. Yes, I do think that right now we're going towards making customers ultimately king and queens of everything that's happening. You go to a merchant and like, for example, it was with Martina from Wiro. I really would love this initiative to move forward. And yeah, like it's all customer centric, which I absolutely adore. It's like, like when you talk to merchants, what they want and how they're going to bring, for example, Wiro out is, yeah, sure, sovereignty and everything else, right? Political tensions and things like this, but it's more around, hey, what do customers want? And when you talk to like, the major merchants in the world, it's always about what do customers want. So yes, to answer your question, I think we are. I do think that the networks are doing some cool stuff. I don't know if you know about the token frameworks, which is basically linking a token to a biometrics and a biometrics to device. So it's already linked, but like that is going to be, think about the Apple Pay experience, but now brought out of just Apple, and you can do it basically on any checkout.
But it's making the user life easier.
Correct.
At the end of the day, that's what's needed, right? It opens up so many doors for people. I mean, given the irreversibility of these real-time payments, right? As we mentioned, it's moving super fast. We've talked around the consumer now. Given the irreversibility of RTP, should banks, consumers, and governments bear greater responsibility when fraud occurs? Europe and the UK have introduced stricter regulations on financial institutions offering RTP. Do you think this is a model others should follow on a global standpoint?
That's a loaded one.
It's a big question. Yeah.
I don't know if it's about regulations, because the regulations apply for Europeans based on how we run our countries.
Yeah.
Companies and people and politics, like governments, they run their countries so differently in the regions. Like the same regulations and the same strictness, I don't think would work. Same as I don't think that what works in the UK can work in Germany, and neither can it work in France, right? So like I think that for me, it's less about regulations and more about what are the technological advancements that we're going to see and how can we leverage them and the technology that we're going to be developing, including AI, including biometrics, passkeys, and linking payments to an identity, right? Including the blockchain, using that technology to create better processes, infrastructures, and everything there to combat fraud while still, enabling the best performance.
Definitely. And that's why I love connecting the dots and payments and, of course, RegTech and everything else that you do, because the market sentiment that we see is, look, there's fraud rising within the space. Of course, who best to do it in terms of apply methodologies which actually stop fraudsters in their track, or actually talk about ways that we can look at real-time payments in a different light as well. Because at the end of the day, we need to protect the consumers, but the consumer also doesn't want any lapse in the service provision, right? They don't want to go back in time. And they don't want anything else. Real-time payments have transformed how we use money, as well as move it. Not just for consumers, but also for fraudsters. As the technology actually advances, so do their tactics. That's where the What the Fraud Summit comes in. Happening this November 19th to the 20th in Singapore. Not a single industry can keep up with emerging threats alone. That's why this summit brings together voices from fintech, from crypto, tech compliance, and beyond to tackle the risks associated with the convenience of instant payments. Experts from Crypto.com, HSBC, Ernst & Young, and other leading companies will share fundamental strategies, leveraging AI to flag fraud in real time, fortifying your payment infrastructure, and staying agile amid evolving global regulations. So there'll be 50 plus speakers, 500 or more attendees, with 40% of them being C-suite. So hit the link in the episode description or secure your spot at sumsub.com/WTF-summit. I would love to ask you, as we look at the future of real-time payments now, about sort of the state of fraud prevention in your expertise. From your side, Arthur, what does real-time fraud prevention look like in practice right now? Are legacy systems that you've seen in use fit for purpose?
The real answer is no. I think we've been proactive on the fraud side instead of, reactive on the fraud side, my bad, instead of proactive. Sometimes the opposite. I think that right now we're reacting as much as possible. When, again, as I said, I think, you look at, and this is going to be a major topic in all of 2025, like synthetic identity fraud. When you look at this, like if we want to be proactive from the get-go, it shouldn't be about, it's always about money, but it shouldn't be about money. It should be about how can we all collaborate to provide an experience for consumers that's the best possible. There's a company in the orchestrating space, in the payment space, right? What they did is they created an open source orchestration.
Right.
Brilliant. Right. Why? Because it enables other companies to come on and like ultimately just like build on top, and they can continue to do that. I see value there. I think that we need to do more. We need to collaborate more. There's a gap there, and not just between companies. I think it should also happen at government levels. There's tensions today, so like I don't know what's going to happen there. But obviously, I really believe that we need to do more. And then I do think there are good things in place, candidly. And I'm being brought on purpose. I think that the networks are doing amazing with everything token frameworks related and like how they're looking at it. As I said, like new trends like agentic purchasing are coming out and they're doing some cool stuff. I think MasterCard just released like a pioneering agentic purchasing, which is great. Why? Because it's not just about intent, it's about consent. It's about both of them together and getting that into a token. And to me, that's interesting. They're trying to be proactive. I think that's what needs to happen. I think companies like you guys have an amazing opportunity here in developing something for consumers, but I think the scale in which we need to think shouldn't just be at company level. It should be at a global scale, like literally government levels. So if we do that, good. The one issue that I'm seeing and why I'm saying no.
What's that?
Is AI.
Yeah.
AI is the most powerful positive force that we're all going to see. It's also the most powerful negative force that we're going to see. And so the use of it, we're talking about potentially now receiving, transactions from agents.
Yeah.
Not only via, ultimately a phone, but
inherently that's going to come with its own risks as well, right? I mean, we've got rising pressure to innovate utilizing AI. And now fraudsters have more access to, of course, combat our preventative measures, right? And then we're going to be in a position of a continuous cat and mouse game. It's going to be, as you mentioned before, something where we're going to be a little bit on the defensive side, trying to figure out where these attacks are coming from and how to block them with new innovative measures, right? Do you think fintechs specifically and neobanks, etc., will be forced to cut corners on fraud prevention in any way or form?
If I answer that.
Without naming names.
Yeah, I think it's already happening. I think that's the beauty of having gray lines, right? So yeah, I do think that some companies do cut corners around how they do things today. Are they going to get slapped or not? I don't know, because some of it is so new that like maybe what they're doing is not compliant today. But because it's the only way that things are working and it's for new purposes and new use cases, maybe it makes sense to make it acceptable for this, right? So it's like, that's what I'm seeing. So the answer is yes, they're cutting corners. Yeah. The answer is it acceptable? I guess we'll see.
So Arthur, from your perspective as well, if you could predict one major shift, let's say, in how fintechs sort of combat fraud in the future, in the next 3 to 5 years, for instance, and you had not a crystal ball, as you mentioned earlier, but a magic wand, right? To say one thing for my audience, our audience, to prepare us for the future, what would it be?
A better use of the blockchain. I think AI has been around. You look at payments, I mean, smart routing has been around. Like now you just have to define what AI is. Is it machine learning? Is it deep learning? Is it Gen AI? Is it agentic AI? Right? It's what type, but it's been around, right? I think the blockchain technology has innate capabilities that can really be used. I'll tell you why this is fascinating. You ask 99.99999% of the people how Visa and MasterCard works. Nobody knows, and yet they use them, right? If you ask people how the blockchain works, actually, I have a feeling that more people will actually understand today how the blockchain works. Why? Because everybody had an interest in it. It was new, right? So it's like shiny. So if the customers are ultimately receiving the same kind of experience, but the backend changes, and the technology ultimately is innate, as I was saying, without having to build and everything else, I think that could be extremely fascinating. And funny enough, I would never say that like blockchain is actually going in the opposite direction of the networks, the card networks. I think that the networks are actually innovating quite extensively right now with that technology. But because of the technology, smart contracts and the use cases, And you can apply that then to like potentially AI, right? Building new chains and like creating new networks and like having a global scale with this. And I think that everything will be based on the blockchain, and AI will be a tool that will just accelerate growth for everything around. So that's what my prediction would be is the blockchain technology and the use cases around it based on what the technology can do are going to evolve in the best way possible.
Absolutely. Industry is moving so fast and it's moving incrementally. So it doesn't mean everything's going to happen at once on a global scale. We're looking at geographic markets, as you mentioned, LATAM, North America. They're solving problems in real time for the fraud types that they're seeing on a day-to-day basis. And that's going to be geographically driven as well. Before we end, by the way, Arthur, I'd like to fire off a few shots at you.
Go.
Quick fire questions, right? Go. So nothing too serious. We do this with all of our guests. Okay. And I would like to sort of propose a couple of these questions where you can give a little bit of feedback and we can get to know you a bit better as well. Are you ready?
Yes, yeah, sure. Let's go.
When choosing a digital wallet, do you go for more features or better security?
Right off my head like this, more features.
More features. Interesting. What's one thing about how people use digital payments that you found that still surprises you today? I mean, even after all of your experience.
That they don't use it.
That they don't use it?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. But it touches everyone, right?
What I will say is basically, how come after all of the identification layers that we're putting in place and everything else, you still think that a card present transaction is actually more secured than a transaction online? You're identifying the user. Like, I can get my wallet stolen, like somebody can just pay with it, and like if I paid with it once in the UK and I just landed, right? Somebody can use it for like a day, and if my phone is off for whatever reason, you just go ahead. Like, nobody's identifying the user, the customer. So like, to me, it's crazy that POS systems and like cards are still present to an extent. I think everything is moving to digital wallets.
Well, it's a really interesting point, right? And so, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, some countries and some regions are just skipping straight to digital wallets instead of embracing cards as well. And on the link there, you mentioned, of course, well, someone can just take your card and spend whatever. Have you actually been a victim of fraud yourself?
Once in San Francisco.
San Francisco?
Yeah. And I was there and like someone stole my card, and then I see like I think it was a $250 at a hairdresser.
Wow.
And I was like, wait, like...
They went straight to the barbers.
Yeah, I was like, seriously? Like, that's where you go? And funny enough, like, I had to call. I was Vamex, so it was fine. And I kind of realized, it wasn't me, and they were incredible. Like, honestly, like Amex, the service they provide is great. So yeah, it has happened to me.
Okay, well, thankfully, it's not as bad as the last episode. One of the stories there, you got away with it in the end. Yeah. I think our final quickfire question is: if you could be in any other industry, in any other role than the one that you're currently in right now, Arthur, what would it be? Where would you be? What would you like to do? What
I love about what I do is the position that I take. I think I'm a voice. I don't consider myself an expert. And so like, I don't know that would change it. I mean, if I could drive a Formula One, I would love to do it. For example, if I could be a professional tennis player, like my good friend Arthur Bedel, I would love to do that as well. But I would say probably do the same thing in a different industry. I love the blockchain technology. Maybe why not there? But I don't know. I think I wake up every day and I'm very fortunate about what I do. So that would be either drive an F1 car, maybe be a Sum, like, that travels everywhere to try new wines. Like, I would. Well,
you do travel everywhere and you do try new wines. So. But there's loads of exciting things there, actually. F1 driver, sommelier, but nothing to do with payments. Maybe crypto. I mean, you could go into
blockchain. I love that.
But not fraud. You didn't say anything about going into... No.
I think it's very interesting. I think you need to be hyper detail-oriented. It's not my strongest skill, to be honest. Like, I have more of a very much like high-level vision.
You've got the macro lenses, looking at the wider industry.
Yeah, I love that.
Well, as what you're doing with connecting the dots in fintech, regtech, everything as well, I think I can speak for everyone when we just love seeing the sort of wider scope, right? In the way that you detail, make things and details super easily digestible. So, Arthur, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks,
it's been great to have you and, of course, all of your experience in one spot. So, great speaking with you.
Thank you, seriously. And again, I can't take most of the credit. Like Marcel is doing an incredible work. But
Absolutely.
no, seriously, love the What the Fraud podcast. This was great. Maybe we do another one at some point in time. But thank you, Tom, and thanks Sumsub for it.
Absolutely. We'll be jumping on yours next, which is the main idea.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. So, calling all listeners, we need your support. Please hit that follow button on your favorite podcast platform. And if this episode left you feeling empowered, drop a review. It helps other individuals out there trying to dodge the digital tricksters. So let's cut the small talk and get down to business. Follow, comment, review, you know the drill. And if you want to hear more about what we do at Sumsub and how your business can actually benefit from our verification services within payments, business verification and transaction monitoring, check out our website at www.sumsub.com and subscribe to all of our socials as well. What the Fraud is a Listen production. The producer is Adrian Bradley and the executive producer is Nick Minter. The producer from Sumsub is Mila Faravina. So stay safe and see you on the next one.